Technical failure? Concentric failure? Eccentric failure? Am I a failure? There's so many different types. In today's video, I'm going to explain all of these in detail to help you understand the very important concept of failure when it comes to training and sports performance. Roll it! Yo, what's the crack, my happy face pullers, your personal trainer T-Talks, changing people's lives for the better through strength and fitness. Today is all about failure. What is it? Which types are there? How can I use them in my training? But before I go ahead to answer all these questions, please give me a thumbs up and drop me a comment to let me know how you're currently using failure in your training. Alright, let's do it.
Technical failure.
This term refers to the point whereby the technique of a specific movement worsens. The work accumulated before the point of technical failure is typically performed with the goal of maximizing form proficiency in a specific movement pattern. The athlete is not taken to a maximum level of effort, but only to the point where he or she can maintain perfect execution in a given exercise. Such a strong emphasis on technical proficiency forces the trainee to ingrain movement patterns at the highest quality. If technical proficiency is the primary goal in a given session, fatigue should be avoided because it will compromise pristine execution. The athlete could still complete more total work at a relatively good level of form, but at this point compensatory patterns, imbalances, or a decrease in speed are bound to happen. If the coach sees no benefit in exposing the athlete to an environment conducive to technique breakdown, the exercise should only be performed to achieve form excellence. Technical failure is a useful conceptual tool we can use when the goal is to improve a capacity within the force-velocity curve at the highest level of form.
Concentric failure.
This is another conceptual landmark to help us understand the next destination within the fatigue continuum. Once the athlete gets past technical proficiency, the individual has to continue to complete work in a fatigue state. This is neither good or bad. It all depends on what the goal is. For example, if the athlete is going through a phase where hypertrophic adaptations are desirable, aka gaining muscle mass, then it makes sense to train past technical failure and spend time doing work close to concentric failure. So, what does concentric mean? Concentric refers to a muscular contraction where the muscle shortens because the individual is overcoming the resistance. Here, the athlete must produce a force greater than the load for things to get going, irrespective of where the resistance comes from. Either an external object or your own body weight, the trainee has to exceed that resistance to set things into motion. It is commonly accepted in the strength and conditioning world that getting close or occasionally reaching concentric failure is the best way to maximize hypertrophy. But this whole premise brings me to the next question. Why would I want to get close but not reach concentric failure in every single set? I mean, reaching concentric failure implies a higher level of effort than getting close to it. So, wouldn't that result in more muscle gains? Well, if you were to perform the first sets of your first exercise in a given session to the point where you can no longer complete the lift, the incurred fatigue would be so detrimental that it would negatively impact the rest of your training session. You wouldn't be able to complete as much total work due to the massive fatigue toll of that first set you pushed to concentric failure. Scientific studies as well as anecdotal evidence suggest that reaching concentric failure should only be used occasionally and strategically. This is why it would be smart to follow some general guidelines when reaching an all-out effort level in a given set. I'm going to show you two instances where concentric failure happens. One is acceptable and safe, whereas the other is unnecessary and potentially dangerous. So lucky there was someone around to help me out. Quick break. If you're enjoying the video so far, smash the like button. Back to the video. The unpracticality of reaching concentric failure all the time leads us to another important concept: repetitions in reserve, RIR. Repetitions in reserve refer to the number of reps that you could have completed in a given exercise if you had pushed that set to the maximum limit. Without getting too deep into the nitty-gritty of RIR, it is common practice to leave 1 to 4 repetitions in reserve to train more intelligently when the goal is hypertrophy. Pushing the majority of your working sets to 1 to 4 repetitions in reserve ensures that the trainee accumulates sufficient quality volume without incurring an overwhelming level of fatigue that could otherwise impair sustainable progress and recovery. The specific number of reps in reserve will mostly depend on the athlete's training experience, strength level, and where the individual is within the training mesocycle. Both concentric failure and reps in reserve are concepts that are commonly used whenever hypertrophy is the primary goal in the training program. Grindy rep taking forever, there is no way I can complete another one.
Eccentric failure.
Finally, we have the nastiest failure of them all. Once you pass technical failure and concentric failure, you are on your way to the most muscle damaging threshold within the fatigue continuum. This type of failure involves pushing a set past the point where you can no longer complete the concentric portion of a repetition. At this point, you can't overcome the resistance anymore, aka complete another repetition, lift the way up, but you can still resist the load during the negative portion on the way down. The eccentric muscular contraction in a repetition corresponds to the lengthening of the muscle. Here you can be up to 50% stronger than during the concentric contraction. For example, that's why people who can't do pull-ups yet can sometimes complete the lowering phase of the pull-up. They don't have to produce a force greater than gravity to overcome the resistance, in this case their own body weight. They only need to resist gravity and yield to it in a controlled manner. If you're a novice or beginner trainee with little to no training experience, I would advise you to stay away from this type of failure. Intermediate lifters prioritizing hypertrophy could use this technique very sparingly with smaller exercises right before a deload period. That would be fine. Why am I making all these distinctions? Well, the truth is that reaching eccentric failure was popularized by professional bodybuilders looking for ways to cause the most damage to the muscle. My piece of advice is this: please understand this key difference. Competitive bodybuilding uses all sorts of drugs that enhance an already advanced trainee's ability to recover, so that this individual can train more often. If you don't fall into this category and you mess around with eccentric failure, you could experience severe DOMs the following days. I personally use this technique very occasionally, and I only do it with body weight exercises or smaller single joint moves. I just don't think that the stimulus to fatigue ratio is worth your while when done multiple times in a week, let alone within the same training session. Look, everyone has different recovery capacities and predisposition to delayed onset of muscle soreness, but if you really want to take a set to eccentric failure for whatever reason, I would recommend you do it with very small exercises like lateral delt raises or bicep curls. So what makes eccentric failure so brutal? First, you need to reach your max effort threshold in a given exercise, that is, reaching concentric failure. But right after that, you're forcing an already exhausted muscle or muscle groups to accumulate more volume in a phase where the most tears occur as muscle fibers lengthen. In other words, you're adding extra work in the most damaging part of the exercise in an already fatigued state. Novice and beginner trainees should never reach eccentric failure. Intermediate lifters could perhaps use it very occasionally with smaller exercises before a deload phase. That'd be fine. But for the most part, this is a training stimulus that should be exclusive to advanced trainees. I'm talking about very strong muscular individuals who perhaps require a most extreme approach to eke out their very last muscle building potential they can achieve. Alright people, that's all I wanted to say today. I really hope you learned something new and valuable in this video. If you did, you could pay me with a like. And if you think that I could be a source of information and motivation for you to make better gains in your training, please consider subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I'll be back before you know it. In the meantime, stay fit, stay strong, give me a thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more gains.